Viewed from the heights of space, one country shines brightly, while the other disappears into the dark. This line isn't just about power, it's a bitter truth etched between liberty and chains. One nation, one history. But two completely different realities. Light on one side, and eternal silence on the other. This border is so lethal, it stands as the most fortified frontier on the planet. Here, one wrong move doesn't just lead to danger, it leads straight to death. Crossing this border without permission is nothing short of suicide, because here, the bullet speaks before the law. This line means instant and certain death. Inside these borders, every step is watched and every movement is restricted. Here, freedom is but a dream, held tight in the state's iron grip. Every morning begins with state-approved messages. In this world, silence is your only sanctuary, and curiosity is your greatest threat. To ask a question is to invite a tragedy. In the aftermath of World War II, Korea found itself at a fateful crossroads, a moment in time that would eventually tear a nation in two and change the course of history forever. Driven by the interests of foreign powers, the peninsula was torn in two. A single line carved a nation into north and south, separating people who had been one for millennia. Then, the silence was shattered by war. A conflict so deep, it pitted brother against brother, turning a shared heritage into a bloody battlefield of opposing ideologies. The cost was unbearable. Millions of lives were extinguished, and entire cities were wiped from the map, leaving behind nothing but ashes and the echoes. The guns never fell silent for good. The war never officially ended, it was merely frozen in time. Amidst the smoldering ash and the wreckage of a broken nation, a new shadow began to loom. From the very ruins of the North, a leader emerged. The foundations of the state were not laid upon the principles of democracy, but upon the pillars of absolute, unwavering devotion. In a world where laws were rewritten, only one pillar remained standing. Loyalty, absolute and unquestioned, became the very foundation of the state. The canvas was no longer a place for the soul to speak. In the North, art ceased to be an expression, and became a weapon of instruction. The truth was placed under lock and key, the windows to the outside world were shuttered. Every radio, every mind, and every ear was tuned to only one frequency, the voice of the regime. Here, there are no different versions of the truth. Every voice echoes the same story, and every pen writes the same history. Only as the state went off, seeds of devotion were planted long before the first seeds of doubt. Here, the process of indoctrination began, even before a child had learned the power of a question. The past was no longer a matter of record, it became a matter of choice. In the North, even memory was controlled, as history itself rewritten. The state didn't just watch from the streets, it watched from the living room walls. In every home, across every threshold, it was a legal requirement to display their image. Even a light layer of dust on these pictures can make your life hell. Here, dusting is not just a necessity, but a proof of loyalty. When the state orders, you have to smile. Here, there is a guard on tears and public joy are a compulsion. Personal feelings were now replaced by a choreography, where every tear and every smile was part of a predetermined script. The army is no longer just a defense force, but has become the pillar of the state and the backbone of the nation. The entire treasury of the state is not dedicated to feeding the people, but to protecting the system. Here, power is more valuable than man. Food shortages have given birth to a generation that has never dreamed of eating to its full. Hunger has become the destiny there. Food is not just for filling the stomach, but a measure of survival. Every morsel is precious, because it is the last support of life. When the fire in the belly grew too great, the chains of fear were broken. People followed paths to survive that made the soul tremble just thinking about them. The city's tall buildings and wide streets told a different story, an image that was created to throw dust in the eyes of the world. There were comforts and privileges, but their door was opened only to those whose loyalty. Below these monuments built for display, war preparations are buried. Here, there is a bunker under every stone and a tunnel under every road. The preparations for war never stopped. Generations changed, but the fear of the enemy and the display of weapons remained the destiny of this nation. Children learned battle songs before lullabies and weapons before toys. For them, the world is not a beautiful place, but a battlefield where they are being trained only to fight. Every branch of knowledge has been chained to the chains of ideology. The first duty of schools here is not to produce a student, but to produce a loyal follower. Now bowing down is no longer an option. Rather, it has become the only condition for survival. Here obedience is life and disagreement means death. The eyes of the state never close. Even in the darkest nights, they guard your thoughts and the whispers hidden behind the walls. Time has also lost its freedom under the watch of the state. Here there is no difference between yesterday and today, only one long night that seems to span centuries. The darkness of the night does not protect anyone here, but rather tightens the chains of the borders even more. The fences here are not just wires, but a web of death. The state has its eyes on every escape route, and guards every thought. Here the walls already had ears, now spies have been planted in minds as well. No matter how tight the guards are, dreams find a way. Some people were now starting to think about the world beyond. In North Korea, asking questions is not just curiosity, but signing your own death warrant. Here, silence is safety and questions a deadly rebellion. Every moment of everyday life exposes the truth of how deep the state's control is. No moment here is your own, every movement and every breath is bound by someone else's orders. Mornings here don't bring dreams, they bring burdens, a routine on which survival depends. Here, the rations are distributed and the hours are counted. Waiting is not just a compulsion, but the only way to survive here. In this battle for survival, every grain is recorded in the government's accounts. How much you will eat is determined not by your hunger, but by the pen of the state. Whatever the state scales say, the fact is that these young ones die before the month is out. The battle for survival here is a new test every day. The journey of education also begins at the threshold of hardship, where children are taught to endure the hardships of the earth before they can even hold a pen. With or without books in schools, the supply of ideology never stops. Where the rooms may lack light, the heat of propaganda is always present. The first lesson of education is not consciousness, but loyalty. Here books are opened not to tell facts, but to assure the greatness of the ruler. Free thinking is not only discouraged, but considered a sin, where your mind is free to think only what the state has allowed. Repetition is the law there, and curiosity a crime, where memory takes precedence over questioning. The reality is that only the government speaks, and everyone has to listen. One voice makes decisions for the rest of their lives and everyone else is just a silent bystander. There are guards at the hearing as well. If you don't listen to the official announcement, you could be in the eyes of the state, and to remain suspicious in this country is like losing your life. It is mandatory to have a picture of the leader on the wall of the house. These pictures are not just decoration, but proof that your private life, your sorrows and joys, are all in the eyes of the state. A speck of dust, and an accusation of treason. Here the evidence of devotion is given by the brilliance of these images. Only one command resounds amidst the flames: pictures first, life later. Here paper is worth more than blood. First the picture, then life. Ashes are allowed here, but not betrayal. The truth is limited only to your mind, because every word that comes out is no longer your own. Surveillance is not a temporary process, but has become a part of everyday life, where even the shadows are informers of the state and even the silence in the air is preparing a report. There is a complete ban on religion there because the state does not recognize any other god. There, the minarets of mosques and church bells have been silenced. The faith is an ideological threat. In the eyes of the state, bowing down to another entity is an affront to its own sovereignty. Praying to is not just a religious act, but a declaration of rebellion. Here, worship has been diverted from the Creator to the state. All the paths of devotion that once led to heaven now end at the palaces and statues of Pyongyang. Here, silence is not a choice, but a necessity. There are days when the only price of survival is silence. Here are days when laughter is officially banned. On these anniversaries of mourning, joy becomes a crime, and you are forced to wear the sadness that the state has chosen for you. Here, even feelings can become crimes. In a world where the state determines the direction of your tears and the timing of your smiles, a person's own heart becomes his greatest enemy. There, the radios are sealed with government seals so that no outside sound can penetrate their world. It's not just the guards on the devices, but the chains on the windows of consciousness that keep them away from reality. Breaking a radio cell is a serious crime there, punishable by labor in the camps or worse. The state wants your ears to hear only what is being broadcast on the official frequency. Everything else is poison, and the one who tastes it is a criminal. The capital is lit up, but the entire country is in darkness, where electricity is a dream and darkness is a bitter reality. Darkness has molded life here into a certain mold. Outside the capital, night means not just sleep but an enforced silence, where the absence of light is the norm and living in the dark has become an art. Power in Pyongyang doesn't just mean electricity, but the reward for loyalty. Here, light is reserved for those loyal to the regime. Every aspect of life here is different from the rest of the country, because every glimmer here is a part of state propaganda. Here, comforts are not earned by hard work, but by the level of loyalty. Your social status determines whether you will have electricity in your home, whether you will have enough food to eat, or just the hope of survival. Where your class chooses the destination, every journey becomes a prison. Every piece of land there is a prison. You have to bow your head at the threshold of the state to go from one district to another in your own country. There is no freedom of movement there, only obedience to orders. In North Korea, machines have stopped exhausted, but humans are not allowed to stop. Here, from fields to factories, all the work that should have been done with metal and engines is now done by hands and shoulders. Here, labor is not a virtue, but a forced necessity. A country that claims to be a nuclear power, but whose farmers are still captive to centuries-old practices. In North Korea, there is no clear line between childhood and labor. School hours are not just dedicated to books, but to rebuilding the state. More time is spent with tools than with pens. In North Korea, foreign ideas are not just considered different, but deadly. People are taught from childhood that every message from the outside world is a conspiracy to destroy their peace. Seeking information there is not curiosity, but treason. In North Korea, there is a strict ban on foreign media, because in an empire where lofty palaces are built on lies, even a wave of truth is enough to sweep everything away. Watching a foreign film in North Korea is not just a crime, it's treason. A film smuggled across the border is enough to land you in a labor camp or even death. Their obedience is born not of devotion, but of fear, a fear that haunts like a shadow, that peeks from behind walls and that forces a person to fear his own thoughts. Here the bowed head is not a sign that they agree, but proof that they want to live. Here, neighborhood meetings are not just a social necessity, but a terrible means of control, where people are brought face to face every week to confess their sins and point fingers at the shortcomings of others. It is a place where friendship and trust are sacrificed to loyalty to the state. Here, even the choice of silence is not your own. Be it joy or sorrow, participation is mandatory. You have to cry at funerals that have nothing to do with you, and applaud at successes that have no benefit to you. Here, every smile is an order, and every tear a duty. Time is also a watch in North Korea. Your fatigue does not determine your rest, but the official schedule determines when you have to sleep and when you have to wake up. Life there is a machine with a switch in someone else's hand, and that switch is turned off only when the state's need is met. The nights in North Korea are silent. As soon as the official broadcast ends, the entire country falls into a graveyard-like silence. Even whispering is dangerous there, so people make silence their blanket. No matter how deep the fear, it cannot chain the human consciousness. Here questions arise not in a noisy way, but in silence. Here, the price of disobedience is not paid only in tears. For those who dare to clash with this iron system, the punishment is as severe as the wrath of the state. There, prisons not only swallow human beings, but also erase their names and traces, and even their generations. Hidden within these lofty mountains are places whose names are a crime. Here, humans are not only imprisoned, but they are erased from the pages of history forever. These are valleys that have so far been the preserve of only sobs and silence. Hiding in the mountains are the torture chambers that the world calls prison camps. Millions of people are imprisoned here simply because one of their loved ones dared to speak out against the state. This is a hell from which no news comes out, only silence. Behind these walls, not only bodies are imprisoned, but entire lives are destroyed. Here, erasing someone's name is as easy as erasing a piece of paper. In North Korea, silence is used as a weapon. Fear is the chain that locks tongues. Every citizen there knows that even a whisper can destroy his entire family, so silence has become the only way to survive. In these camps, there is no limit to the toil, except death. Prisoners are worked until their bones refuse to bear the burden. Here, not sweat, but life is squeezed out, and when the body is piled up, the state considers it a useless part and throws it into the trash. Here, the state doesn't care whether you are hungry or sick, it just has to meet its targets. Here, the production curve is considered far more important than the decline of human life. There, the grip of the law is so swift that you are punished before you realize your mistake. Disobedience means instant arrest, instant torture, and instant destruction. Here the state never blinks, and its wrath strikes like lightning, without warning, without mercy. Walls don't just stop movement, they imprison the human spirit. When you are completely cut off from the rest of the world, when no sound, no news, no one can reach you, then even the greatest courage proves to be a wall of sand. In North Korea's prisons and camps, pain is the supreme law. There, the reformation is not through advice, but through physical torture. People are taught that disobeying the state's orders means unspeakable physical suffering. It is a discipline founded on the destruction of human nerves. Propaganda in North Korea cannot fill the stomach. Hunger is a constant companion there, present everywhere from prisons to ordinary streets. When the state spends all its resources on the military, all that is left is empty hands and withered faces. Living here is an art, and hunger is the greatest test of that art. Survival depends only on silent solidarity. The existence of medical facilities there is limited to mere papers. Treatment has become a distant dream for the common citizen. There is no word for weakness in the dictionary of this ruthless system. Here, those who are weakened and fall are not supported, but rather crushed. There are some unfortunate ones who are taken here in the dark of night, whose names and traces are erased from the pages of history forever. Here, a sin is committed by one person, but its punishment is suffered by 3 generations to come, where even the children born bear the burden of the sins of their elders. Crime here is not just an act, but a legacy that is passed down through generations with blood, where even innocent children open their eyes only by becoming prisoners. These prisons are not just centers of punishment, but furnaces of obedience, where the human conscience is melted and molded into the mold of the state. Fear is not a hidden thing there, but is taught openly in a crowded crowd, so that every watching eye knows what the consequences of clashing with the system are. In this land, silence alone is not enough. Turning a blind eye to a crime is also a grave danger, because here indifference can be punished with death. Here, the journey of trauma begins before consciousness, where innocent childhood is nurtured in the shadow of death and torture, instead of play. In this prison, even your tears and smiles are guarded by the state, where the wrong expression of emotions is considered a serious crime equal to treason. Millions of lives, their dreams and their screams, are buried forever today under piles of government files and dusty papers. The truth that the state wants to hide in the depths of the earth is now clearly visible to the entire world from the heights of the sky, through the eyes of satellites. When those who escaped this siege tell their stories, their words reveal a suffering that is beyond the imagination of an ordinary person. Even in this dense darkness and shadow of oppression, a faint wave of hope breathes quietly somewhere that refuses to be extinguished. Trust is a word that has disappeared. Here, trusting others behind your own walls can be the biggest mistake of life. The colors of the seasons change here, but the spirit of oppression never changes. Years pass, but that endless series of punishments remains the same. The dream of freedom exists in the air there, but it is like a horizon that can be seen, but never touched. The attempt to escape from this iron grip is not just a dream, but akin to staring into the eyes of death, where only annihilation awaits at every step. These borders are not just lines, but walls of death made of gunpowder and steel, where one wrong step could prove to be the last mistake of your life. Despite these death guards and bloody borders, there are some brave souls who risk everything, because it is better to die in search of freedom than to live a life of slavery. In this silent settlement, the state never blinks an eye. Here, even in the darkest nights, the guard of oppression never sleeps, where every breath is recorded. There is no place for compassion in this system. Here, rejoicing in the suffering of others and showing ruthlessness is considered the greatest proof of loyalty to the state. This oppression is not just stuck in one place, but this system is constantly spreading like a poisonous vine, and with each passing day, its grip on humanity is tightening. Years of imprisonment and the recognition of a mere number instead of a name gradually rob a person of their past and their identity, to the point where they even forget themselves. Life has no value within this enclosure. Death is not an unusual event there, but rather a bitter routine that passes silently with each setting sun. There is no accounting for those who perish here, their names are never part of any document. They are dismissed from this world as if they never existed. The silence here is not simply the absence of sound, but a constant reality that swallows up even the screams, where truth is forever buried in the grave of anonymity. Hope behind this fence is a deadly gamble, because dreaming of a dream that can never be fulfilled wounds a person much deeper than physical torture. Fear is not a temporary state here, but a constant atmosphere in which people breathe, which is with them at all times, whether they sleep or wake up, like an unseen shadow. Here, the deep darkness of the night is not simply a lack of light, but a declaration of the power of the state and the silent obedience of the people, where every extinguished lamp tells a story of complete submission. The walls of these prisons are so high and mysterious that the average citizen is completely unaware of the horrific truth hidden behind them, as if they were part of another world. Here, leaving home is not just considered migration, but open treason to the state, where those left behind have to pay the price of your decision with their own blood. Despite these terrifying death watches and accusations of treason, some people still risk everything, because it is better to perish in search of freedom than in the chains of slavery. For many, this journey to freedom begins in pitch darkness, where even a small light can be a summons to death, and every sigh stops the heartbeat. There is only an inch between life and death on this thorny path, where a single wrong step could be the final mark of your journey, and your story could be buried forever. Not just walls, but thousands of unseen eyes guard this border, where death has been placed on the movement of every shadow so that not even a bird can flap its wings. Modern technology has now become a digital chain for them that monitors every move, where your own shadow, with the help of machines, is enough to testify against you. These borders are carved not just to block the way, but to take lives, where every barbed wire barb and every waving electric shock is placed only to deliver the message of death. This yearning for freedom is so intense that people throw not only themselves, but their entire families into this game of death, because they know that the fate of those left behind will be worse than death. In this deadly journey, smugglers become the last resort for these helpless travelers, who promise to rescue them from the jaws of death in exchange for a heavy price, but deception and fear pursue them every step of the way. The world outside this fence is beautiful, but remember that freedom does not come for free here. It often comes at a price in the form of loved ones who will never be reunited. These freedom seekers are not human beings but are loaded into containers like inanimate cargo, where they have no companion except suffocating darkness and fear. China is their first stop as they cross the border into North Korea, but it is not a destination, but a land where the fear of arrest and return follows them like a shadow at every turn. Crossing the border is merely a physical escape, but safety is not guaranteed here either, because a tip from an informant or a small mistake could send them back to the same hell. Being caught here means not just imprisonment, but forced return, a journey that leads back to the same darkness from which there is no way back. There is no longer any forgiveness for those who are sent back, but the worst punishments await, beyond human imagination, where the body remains, but the soul is crushed. There, every word, every breath, and every memory is questioned. In these long hours of interrogation, your own mind is made your greatest enemy. Despite all the wounds and horrific memories, some souls gather courage again, because those who once smell the scent of freedom do not want to live in captivity again. The path to freedom has now stretched thousands of miles to the difficult borders of the south, where danger increases with every kilometer, but the yearning for the destination does not let them stop. This search for freedom spans not months but years, where time stands still but fear does not, a migration where a person leaves half their life behind as they reach their destination. When one's own state becomes a death trap, foreign hands become the support of life, those anonymous people who risk their lives to give shelter and hope to these lost souls. No path is safe here, every trail is a death trap. Whether it's snowy mountains or scorching forests, there's a thin line between fate and destiny at every step. This is the story of the North Korean people. Living under the rule of Kim Jong-un, where one leader controls millions of lives.